Joe Biden announced it. He's in. Elections all about getting your base excited. So he made the announcement in drag, wearing a mask, and drinking a Bud Light. So are Democrats excited about this? I would say the reaction has been a little like when your in-laws announce they can stay an extra week. But it says the Republican National Committee, as soon as Biden announced, they released this ad, AI generated, by the way, about the future under Joe Biden. China invades Taiwan, migrant armies overrun the border, San Francisco is under martial law. It's a little bizarre. Imagine if Joe Biden was president. I don't have to. It's like when I was 15 and my father said to me, masturbation will make you go blind. And I'm like, I've been doing it for 3 years, okay?
Good morning. It is Wednesday, May the 3rd, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity Prayer and the Star Spangled Banner, we will have no free lunch, the rape of the mind, promises, property rights, integrity and consistency, and Ayn Rand. All that and more when I get back. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen.
Ladies and gentlemen, please remain standing and remove your hats for the national anthem of the United States of America.
Thank you. And now, there's no free lunch. 250 economic truths from David-Bahnsen.
Under capitalism, man oppresses man, but under socialism, it's the other way around. Russ Roberts. This is one of my favorite quotes in all of economics, not just for its wit and snark. It makes, through wit and snark, the most profound point in the entire Smith-Marx divide. The collectivists have not helped us avoid the dark side of the human condition that they fear in a market economy. They have simply replaced the bad actor with a disinterested third party at best and a totalitarian monster at worst.
And that was There's No Free Lunch by David-Bahnsen. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, a new book, and it's a book that I probably should have started with from the beginning, but it's the first book that I read that got me going on my odyssey towards becoming a true conservative, and answered a lot of questions for me. And it is a book by Ayn Rand called Philosophy, Who Needs It? I always recommend that you, if you want to understand Ayn Rand, start with her nonfiction. She always claimed that fiction was better than nonfiction for getting ideas across. Baloney. Absolute crap. She was wrong about that. But anyway, so you want to get to know Ayn Rand, what she's about, read her nonfiction material. The best place to start is Philosophy, Who Needs It, where she explains to you that you are a philosopher, whether you know it or not, whether you want to be or not, that everybody's a philosopher. And the only question is, what philosophical theory are you following? So, this is a chapter, it's the introduction in chapter 1, and they are, it's about 42 minutes long. So, it's quite a long chapter, but well worth it because it's just packed with good stuff. Here we go.
This is Audible.
Blackstone Audio presents Philosophy, Who Needs It? By Ayn Rand. Introduction. Ayn Rand was not only a novelist and a philosopher, she was also a salesman of philosophy, the greatest salesman philosophy has ever had. Who else could write a romantic bestseller, such as Atlas Shrugged, in which the heroes and the villains are differentiated fundamentally by their metaphysics, in which the wrong epistemology is shown to lead to train wrecks, furnace breakouts, and sexual impotence, in which the right ethics is shown to be the indispensable means to the rebuilding of New York City and of man's soul? Who else could write a book called Philosophy, Who Needs It? And have an answer to offer? Ayn Rand's power to sell philosophy is a consequence of her particular philosophy, objectivism. I am not primarily an advocate of capitalism, but of egoism, she wrote a decade later. And I am not primarily an advocate of egoism, but of reason. If one recognizes the supremacy of reason and applies it consistently, all the rest follows. This, the supremacy of reason, was, is, and will be the primary concern of my work, and the essence of objectivism. The Objectivist, September 1971. Reason, according to objectivism, is not merely a distinguishing attribute of man. It is his fundamental attribute, his basic means of survival. Therefore, whatever reason requires in order to function is a necessity of human life. Reason functions by integrating perceptual data into concepts. This process, Ayn Rand holds, ultimately requires the widest integrations, those which give man knowledge of the universe in which he acts, of his means of knowledge, and of his proper values. Man, therefore, needs metaphysics, epistemology, and ethics, i.e., he needs philosophy. He needs it by his essential nature and for a practical purpose, in order to be able to think, to act, to live. In today's world, this view of the role of philosophy is unique, just as in today's neo-mystic culture, objectivism's advocacy of reason is all but unique. To Ayn Rand, philosophy is not a senseless parade of abstractions created to fill out the ritual at cocktail parties or in Sunday morning services. It is not a ponderous continental wail of futility resounding with oriental overtones. It is not a chess game divorced from reality, designed by British professors for otherwise unemployable colleagues. To Ayn Rand, philosophy is the fundamental factor in human life. It is the basic force that shapes the mind and character of men and the destiny of nations. It shapes them for good or for evil, depending on the kind of philosophy men accept. A man's choice, according to Ayn Rand, is not whether to have a philosophy, but only which philosophy to have. His choice is whether his philosophy will be conscious, explicit, logical, and therefore practical, or random, unidentified, contradictory, and therefore lethal. In these essays, Ayn Rand explains some of the steps necessary to achieve a conscious, rational philosophy. She teaches the reader how to identify, and then evaluate, the hidden premises at work in his own soul or nation. She makes clear the mechanism by which philosophy rules men and society, the forms that abstract theory takes in daily life, and the profound existential consequences that flow from even the most abstruse ideas which may seem at first glance to be of merely academic concern. She shows that when an idea is rational, its consequence, ultimately, is the preservation of man's life, and that when an idea is irrational, its consequence is the opposite. Contrary to the injunctions issued to men for millennia, Ayn Rand did not equate objectivity with disinterest. She was interested in philosophy, in the objectivist sense of self-interest. She wanted, selfishly, for the sake of her own actions in life, to know which ideas are right. If man needs philosophy, she held, he needs one that is true, i.e., in accordance with reality. Philosophy, Who Needs It?, is the last work planned by Ayn Rand before her death in March of this year. The book was first suggested by a Canadian objectivist, Walter Hubscher. In the fall of 1981, he wrote to Miss Rand, "In your articles, you detail dramatically how everyone, through each statement he makes, uses philosophical premises. If such articles were published in a single volume, I believe that it would focus direct attention on philosophy's powerful influence, identify the philosophical roots of some of today's most dangerous trends, and indicate that it is possible to reverse a cultural trend, that everyone can and should get involved in doing just that." Miss Rand was pleased with Mr. Hubscher's idea of a collection taken largely from her newsletter, the Ayn Rand Letter, and featuring as its title piece one of her favorites among her own articles, Philosophy, Who Needs It?, originally a speech given to the United States Military Academy at West Point. In subsequent months, with her publisher at Bobbs Merrill, Grace Shaw, and with friends and associates, she several times discussed her concept of the book. She indicated its contents and structure in general terms. She mentioned articles whose inclusion would be mandatory, and others that she regarded as optional. She did not live long enough, however, to determine the final selection of pieces or their sequence. It has fallen to me to make these decisions, guided, wherever possible, by Miss Rand's stated wishes. Following her policy in other anthologies, I have placed the more theoretical articles in the first part of the book, and followed them by more concrete applications and or essentially critical articles. None of the pieces has been published before in book form. The title article is followed by one written originally as its companion piece. Next comes a group dealing with the objectivist philosophy. The first of these, Chapter 3, her analysis of what is or is not open to change, represents Ayn Rand's fullest discussion in print of one element of the objectivist metaphysics, the primacy of existence. The following discussions of the anti-conceptual mentality, Chapters 4 and 5, are a demonstration, in reverse, of one element of the objectivist epistemology. They show what happens to men who never fully develop the human form of knowledge, concepts. The open letter to Boris Spassky, Chapter 6, The Soviet Chessmaster, is a tour de force summarizing, in the form of a single startling example, the role in man's life of every branch of philosophy. With one exception, all the articles in this book were written between 1970 and 1975. The exception is Faith and Force, the Destroyers of the Modern World. Chapter 7. A speech given initially at Yale University in 1960, a few years after the publication of Atlas Shrugged. This speech is an excellent, simple introduction to objectivism and to Ayn Rand's view of today's world. Until now, it has not been easily available. Those unfamiliar with Miss Rand's work might well be advised to begin their reading with this chapter. There follows an essentially critical section, chapters 8 through 13, dealing with Kant and with some of his heirs, such as the egalitarian movement and B.F. Skinner. Miss Rand was frequently asked why there were so few advocates of good ideas in positions of power today. To indicate her answer, at least in part, I have included two political pieces, chapters 14 and 15. They discuss some current methods used by the government to corrupt our cultural life. These are followed by two pieces, chapters 16 and 17, relating to another question Ayn Rand was repeatedly asked. What can anyone do about the state of today's world? I have ended the book as, I think, Miss Rand would have ended it. Don't Let It Go presents the American sense of life as the basis of hope for this country's future. When articles written years apart are published in book form, editorial changes are occasionally necessary. I have enclosed such changes in square brackets. In a few cases where Miss Rand uses a term that would be unfamiliar to new readers, I have offered a brief definition, also in square brackets. Otherwise, aside from minor copy editing, the text is exactly as worded, and in some cases later reworded, by Ayn Rand herself. Please note that square brackets within a quotation are in every case Miss Rand's and represent her own additions to or comments on the quotation. Since Miss Rand's death, her associates in New York have received a great deal of mail, inquiring how one can learn more about her ideas, how one can obtain back issues of her magazines, what current publications, schools, courses now carry on her philosophy, what work is done by the Foundation for the New Intellectual, etc. If you are interested in any of the above, I suggest that you write to Objectivism P.W., P.O. Box 177, Murray Hill Station, New York, New York, 10016. I regret that, owing to the volume of mail, you will probably not receive a personal reply. But in due course, you will receive literature from several sources indicating the direction to pursue if you wish to investigate Ayn Rand's ideas further, or to support them. Meanwhile, if you are about to read these essays for the first time, I envy you, because of what you will still have in store for you. Ayn Rand has changed many people's minds and lives. Perhaps she will change yours too. Leonard Peikoff, New York City, May 1982. 1. Philosophy. Who needs it? 1974. An address given to the graduating class of the United States Military Academy at West Point on March 6, 1974. Since I am a fiction writer, let us start with a short story. Suppose that you are an astronaut whose spaceship gets out of control and crashes on an unknown planet. When you regain consciousness and find that you are not hurt badly, the first 3 questions in your mind would be, where am I? How can I discover it? What should I do? You see unfamiliar vegetation outside, and there is air to breathe. The sunlight seems paler than you remember it and colder. You turn to look at the sky, but stop. You are struck by a sudden feeling. If you don't look, you won't have to know that you are perhaps too far from the earth and no return is possible. So long as you don't know, you are free to believe what you wish, and you experience a foggy, pleasant, but somewhat guilty kind of hope. You turn to your instruments. They may be damaged. You don't know how seriously, but you stop, struck by a sudden fear. How can you trust these instruments? How can you be sure that they won't mislead you? How can you know whether they will work in a different world? You turn away from the instruments. Now you begin to wonder why you have no desire to do anything. It seems so much safer just to wait for something to turn up somehow. It is better, you tell yourself, not to rock the spaceship. Far in the distance, you see some sort of living creatures approaching. You don't know whether they are human, but they walk on 2 feet. They, you decide, will tell you what to do. You are never heard from again. This is fantasy, you say? You would not act like that, and no astronaut ever would? Well, perhaps not. But this is the way most men live their lives, here on Earth. Most men spend their days struggling to evade 3 questions, the answers to which underlie man's every thought, feeling, and action, whether he is consciously aware of it or not. Where am I? How do I know it? What should I do? By the time they are old enough to understand these questions, men believe that they know the answers. Where am I? Say in New York City. How do I know it? It's self-evident. What should I do? Here they are not too sure, but the usual answer is whatever everybody does. The only trouble seems to be that they are not very active, not very confident, not very happy, and they experience at times a causeless fear and an undefined guilt, which they cannot explain or get rid of. They have never discovered the fact that the trouble comes from the 3 unanswered questions, and that there is only one science that can answer them: philosophy. Philosophy studies the fundamental nature of existence, of man, and of man's relationship to existence. As against the special sciences, which deal only with particular aspects, philosophy deals with those aspects of the universe which pertain to everything that exists. In the realm of cognition, the special sciences are the trees, but philosophy is the soil which makes the forest possible. Philosophy would not tell you, for instance, whether you are in New York City or in Zanzibar, though it would give you the means to find out. But here is what it would tell you. Are you in a universe which is ruled by natural laws and, therefore, is stable, firm, absolute, and knowable? Or are you in an incomprehensible chaos, a realm of inexplicable miracles, an unpredictable, unknowable flux, which your mind is impotent to grasp? Are the things you see around you real, or are they only an illusion? Do they exist independent of any observer, or are they created by the observer? Are they the subject of man's consciousness? Are they what they are, or can they be changed by a mere act of your consciousness, such as a wish? The nature of your actions and of your ambition will be different according to which set of answers you come to accept. These answers are the province of metaphysics, the study of existence as such, or, in Aristotle's words, of being qua being, the basic branch of philosophy. No matter what conclusions you reach, you will be confronted by the necessity to answer another, corollary question. How do I know it? Since man is not omniscient or infallible, you have to discover what you can claim as knowledge and how to prove the validity of your conclusions. Does man acquire knowledge by a process of reason, or by sudden revelation from a supernatural power? Is reason a faculty that identifies and integrates the material provided by man's senses, or is it fed by innate ideas, implanted in man's mind before he was born? Is reason competent to perceive reality? Or does man possess some other cognitive faculty which is superior to reason? Can man achieve certainty, or is he doomed to perpetual doubt? The extent of your self-confidence and of your success will be different according to which set of answers you accept. These answers are the province of epistemology, the theory of knowledge, which studies man's means of cognition. These 2 branches are the theoretical foundation of philosophy. The 3rd branch, ethics, may be regarded as its technology. Ethics does not apply to everything that exists, only to man, but it applies to every aspect of man's life, his character, his actions, his values, his relationship to all of existence. Ethics, or morality, defines a code of values to guide man's choices and actions, the choices and actions that determine the course of his life. Just as the astronaut in my story did not know what he should do because he refused to know where he was and how to discover it, so you cannot know what you should do until you know the nature of the universe you deal with, the nature of your means of cognition, and your own nature. Before you come to ethics, you must answer the questions posed by metaphysics and epistemology. Is man a rational being, able to deal with reality, or is he a helplessly blind misfit, a chip buffeted by the universal flux? Are achievement and enjoyment possible to man on earth, or is he doomed to failure and disaster? Depending on the answers, you can proceed to consider the questions posed by ethics. What is good or evil for man, and why? Should man's primary concern be a quest for joy, or an escape from suffering? Should man hold self-fulfillment or self-destruction as the goal of his life? Should man pursue his values, or should he place the interests of others above his own? Should man seek happiness, or self-sacrifice? I do not have to point out the different consequences of these two sets of answers. You can see them everywhere, within you and around you. The answers given by ethics determine how man should treat other men, and this determines the fourth branch of philosophy, politics, which defines the principles of a proper social system. As an example of philosophy's function, political philosophy will not tell you how much rationed gas you should be given and on which day of the week. It will tell you whether the government has the right to impose any rationing on anything. The fifth and last branch of philosophy is aesthetics, the study of art, which is based on metaphysics, epistemology, and ethics. Art deals with the needs, the refueling of man's consciousness. Now, some of you might say, as many people do, "Oh, I never think in such abstract terms. I want to deal with concrete, particular, real-life problems. What do I need philosophy for?" My answer is, in order to be able to deal with concrete, particular, real-life problems, i.e., in order to be able to live on Earth. You might claim, as most people do, that you have never been influenced by philosophy. I will ask you to check that claim. Have you ever thought or said the following? Don't be so sure. Nobody can be certain of anything. You got that notion from David Hume, and many, many others, even though you might never have heard of him. Or, this may be good in theory, but does it work in practice? You got that from Plato. Or, that was a rotten thing to do, but it's only human. Nobody is perfect in this world. You got it from Augustine. Or, it may be true for you, but it's not true for me. You got it from William James. Or, I couldn't help it. Nobody can help anything he does. You got that from Hegel. Or, I can't prove it, but I feel that it's true. You got it from Kant. Or, it's logical, but logic has nothing to do with reality. You got it from Kant. Or, it's evil because it's selfish. You got it from Kant. Have you heard the modern activists say, act first, think afterward? They got it from John Dewey. Some people might answer, sure, I've said those things at different times, but I don't have to believe that stuff all of the time. It may have been true yesterday, but it's not true today. They got it from Hegel. They might say, consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds. They got it from a very little mind, Emerson. They might say, but can't one compromise and borrow different ideas from different philosophies according to the expediency of the moment? They got it from Richard Nixon, who got it from William James. Now ask yourself, if you are not interested in abstract ideas, why do you, and all men, feel compelled to use them? The fact is that abstract ideas are conceptual integrations which subsume an incalculable number of concretes, and that without abstract ideas you would not be able to deal with concrete, particular, real-life problems. You would be in the position of a newborn infant to whom every object is a unique, unprecedented phenomenon. The difference between his mental state and yours lies in the number of conceptual integrations your mind has performed. You have no choice about the necessity to integrate your observations, your experiences, your knowledge into abstract ideas, i.e. into principles. Your only choice is whether these principles are true or false, whether they represent your conscious, rational convictions, or a grab bag of notions snatched at random, whose sources, validity, context, and consequences you do not know. Notions which, more often than not, you would drop like a hot potato if you knew. But the principles you accept, consciously or subconsciously, may clash with or contradict one another. They, too, have to be integrated. What integrates them? Philosophy. A philosophic system is an integrated view of existence. As a human being, you have no choice about the fact that you need a philosophy. Your only choice is whether you define your philosophy by a conscious, rational, disciplined process of thought and scrupulous, logical deliberation, or you let your subconscious accumulate a junk heap of unwarranted conclusions, false generalizations, undefined contradictions, undigested slogans, unidentified wishes, doubts, and fears, thrown together by chance, but integrated by your subconscious into a kind of mongrel philosophy, and fused into a single solid weight, self-doubt. Like a ball and chain, in the place where your mind's wings should have grown. You might say, as many people do, that it is not easy always to act on abstract principles. No, it is not easy. But how much harder is it to have to act on them without knowing what they are? Your subconscious is like a computer, more complex a computer than man can build, and its main function is the integration of your ideas. Who programs it? Your conscious mind. If you default, if you don't reach any firm convictions, your subconscious is programmed by chance, and you deliver yourself into the power of ideas you do not know you have accepted. But one way or the other, your computer gives you printouts, daily and hourly, in the form of emotions, which are lightning-like estimates of the things around you, calculated according to your values. If you programmed your computer by conscious thinking, you know the nature of your values and emotions. If you didn't, you don't. Many people, particularly today, claim that man cannot live by logic alone, and there's the emotional element of his nature to consider, and that they rely on the guidance of their emotions. Well, so did the astronaut in my story. The joke is on him, and on them. Man's values and emotions are determined by his fundamental view of life. The ultimate programmer of his subconscious is philosophy, the science which, according to the emotionalists, is impotent to affect or penetrate the murky mysteries of their feelings. The quality of a computer's output is determined by the quality of its input. If your subconscious is programmed by chance, its output will have a corresponding character. You have probably heard the computer operator's eloquent term, GIGO, which means garbage in, garbage out. The same formula applies to the relationship between a man's thinking and his emotions. A man who is run by emotions is like a man who is run by a computer whose printouts he cannot read. He does not know whether its programming is true or false, right or wrong, whether it's set to lead him to success or destruction, whether it serves his goals or those of some evil, unknowable power. He is blind on two fronts, blind to the world around him and to his own inner world, unable to grasp reality or his own motives, and he is in chronic terror of both. Emotions are not tools of cognition. The men who are not interested in philosophy need it most urgently. They are most helplessly in its power. The men who are not interested in philosophy absorb its principles from the cultural atmosphere around them, from schools, colleges, books, magazines, newspapers, movies, television, etc. Who sets the tone of a culture? A small handful of men, the philosophers. Others follow their lead, either by conviction or by default. For some 200 years, under the influence of Immanuel Kant, the dominant trend of philosophy has been directed to a single goal: the destruction of man's mind, of his confidence in the power of reason. Today, we are seeing the climax of that trend. When men abandon reason, they find not only that their emotions cannot guide them, but that they can experience no emotion save one: terror. The spread of drug addiction among young people, brought up on today's intellectual fashions, demonstrates the unbearable inner state of men who are deprived of their means of cognition and who seek escape from reality, from the terror of their impotence to deal with existence. Observe these young people's dread of independence and their frantic desire to belong, to attach themselves to some group, clique, or gang. Most of them have never heard of philosophy, but they sense that they need some fundamental answers to questions they dare not ask, and they hope that the tribe will tell them how to live. They are ready to be taken over by any witch doctor, guru, or dictator. One of the most dangerous things a man can do is to surrender his moral autonomy to others. Like the astronaut in my story, he does not know whether they are human, even though they walk on 2 feet. Now you may ask, if philosophy can be that evil, why should one study it? Particularly, why should one study the philosophical theories which are blatantly false, make no sense, and bear no relation to real life? My answer is, in self-protection, and in defense of truth, justice, freedom, and any value you ever held or may ever hold. Not all philosophies are evil, though too many of them are, particularly in modern history. On the other hand, at the root of every civilized achievement, such as science, technology, progress, freedom, at the root of every value we enjoy today, including the birth of this country, you will find the achievement of one man who lived over 2,000 years ago: Aristotle. If you feel nothing but boredom when reading the virtually unintelligible theories of some philosophers, you have my deepest sympathy. But if you brush them aside, saying, "Why should I study that stuff when I know it's nonsense?" you are mistaken. It is nonsense, but you don't know it. Not so long as you go on accepting all their conclusions, all the vicious catchphrases generated by those philosophers, and not so long as you are unable to refute them. That nonsense deals with the most crucial, the life or death issues of man's existence. At the root of every significant philosophic theory, there is a legitimate issue, in the sense that there is an authentic need of man's consciousness, which some theories struggle to clarify, and others struggle to obfuscate, to corrupt, to prevent man from ever discovering. The battle of philosophers is a battle of man's mind. If you do not understand their theories, you are vulnerable to the worst among them. The best way to study philosophy is to approach it as one approaches a detective story. Follow every trail, clue, and implication in order to discover who is a murderer and who is a hero. The criterion of detection is 2 questions: why and how. If a given tenet seems to be true, why? If another tenet seems to be false, why? And how is it being put over? You will not find all the answers immediately, but you will acquire an invaluable characteristic: the ability to think in terms of essentials. Nothing is given to man automatically, neither knowledge, nor self-confidence, nor inner serenity, nor the right way to use his mind. Every value he needs or wants has to be discovered, learned, and acquired, even the proper posture of his body. In this context, I want to say that I've always admired the posture of West Point graduates, a posture that projects man in proud, disciplined control of his body. Well, philosophical training gives man the proper intellectual posture, a proud, disciplined control of his mind. In your own profession, in military science, you know the importance of keeping track of the enemy's weapons, strategy, and tactics, and of being prepared to counter them. The same is true in philosophy. You have to understand the enemy's ideas and be prepared to refute them. You have to know his basic arguments and be able to blast them. In physical warfare, you would not send your men into a booby trap. You would make every effort to discover its location. Well, Kant's system is the biggest and most intricate booby trap in the history of philosophy. But it's so full of holes that once you grasp its gimmick, you can diffuse it without any trouble and walk forward over it in perfect safety. And, once it is diffused, the lesser Kantians, the lower ranks of his army, the philosophical sergeants, buck privates, and mercenaries of today, will fall of their own weightlessness by chain reaction. There is a special reason why you, the future leaders of the United States Army, need to be philosophically armed today. You are the target of a special attack by the Kantian, Hegelian collectivist establishment that dominates our cultural institutions at present. You are the army of the last semi-free country left on earth. Yet you are accused of being a tool of imperialism. And imperialism is the name given to the foreign policy of this country, which has never engaged in military conquest and has never profited from the 2 world wars, which she did not initiate, but entered and won. It was, incidentally, a foolishly overgenerous policy, which made this country waste her wealth on helping both her allies and her former enemies. Something called the military-industrial complex, which is a myth or worse, is being blamed for all of this country's troubles. Bloody college hoodlums scream demands that ROTC units be banned from college campuses. Our defense budget is being attacked, denounced, and undercut by people who claim that financial priority should be given to ecological rose gardens and to classes in aesthetic self-expression for the residents of the slums. Some of you may be bewildered by this campaign and may be wondering, in good faith, what errors you committed to bring it about. If so, it is urgently important for you to understand the nature of the enemy. You are attacked not for any errors or flaws, but for your virtues. You are denounced not for any weaknesses, but for your strength and your competence. You are penalized for being the protectors of the United States. On a lower level of the same issue, a similar kind of campaign is conducted against the police force. Those who seek to destroy this country seek to disarm it, intellectually and physically. But it is not a mere political issue. Politics is not the cause, but the last consequence of philosophical ideas. It is not a communist conspiracy, though some communists may be involved, as maggots cashing in on a disaster they had no power to originate. The motive of the destroyers is not love for communism, but hatred for America. Why hatred? Because America is the living refutation of a Kantian universe. Today's mawkish concern with and compassion for the feeble, the flawed, the suffering, the guilty, is a cover for the profoundly Kantian hatred of the innocent, the strong, the able, the successful, the virtuous, the confident, the happy. A philosophy out to destroy man's mind is necessarily a philosophy of hatred for man, for man's life, and for every human value. Hatred of the good for being the good is the hallmark of the 20th century. This is the enemy you are facing. A battle of this kind requires special weapons. It has to be fought with a full understanding of your cause, a full confidence in yourself, and the fullest certainty of the moral rightness of both. Only philosophy can provide you with these weapons. The assignment I gave myself for tonight is not to sell you on my philosophy, but on philosophy as such. I have, however, been speaking implicitly of my philosophy in every sentence, since none of us and no statement can escape from philosophical premises. What is my selfish interest in the matter? I am confident enough to think that if you accept the importance of philosophy and the task of examining it critically, it is my philosophy that you will come to accept. Formally, I call it objectivism, but informally, I call it a philosophy for living on earth. You will find an explicit presentation of it in my books, particularly in Atlas Shrugged. In conclusion, allow me to speak in personal terms. This evening means a great deal to me. I feel deeply honored by the opportunity to address you. I can say, not as a patriotic bromide, but with full knowledge of the necessary metaphysical, epistemological, ethical, political, and aesthetic roots, that the United States of America is the greatest, the noblest, and in its original founding principles, the only moral country in the history of the world. There is a kind of quiet radiance associated in my mind with the name West Point, because you have preserved the spirit of those original founding principles, and you are their symbol. There were contradictions and omissions in those principles, and there may be in yours, but I am speaking of the essentials. There may be individuals in your history who did not live up to your highest standards, as they are in every institution, since no institution and no social system can guarantee the automatic perfection of all its members. This depends on an individual's free will. I am speaking of your standards. You have preserved 3 qualities of character which were typical at the time of America's birth, but are virtually non-existent today. Earnestness, dedication, a sense of honor. Honor is self-esteem, made visible in action. You have chosen to risk your lives for the defense of this country. I will not insult you by saying that you are dedicated to selfless service. It is not a virtue in my morality. In my morality, the defense of one's country means that a man is personally unwilling to live as the conquered slave of any enemy, foreign or domestic. This is an enormous virtue. Some of you may not be consciously aware of it. I want to help you to realize it. The army of a free country has a great responsibility. The right to use force, but not as an instrument of compulsion and brute conquest, as the armies of other countries have done in their histories. Only as an instrument of a free nation's self-defense, which means the defense of a man's individual rights. The principle of using force only in retaliation against those who initiate its use is the principle of subordinating might to right. The highest integrity and sense of honor are required for such a task. No other army in the world has achieved it. You have. West Point has given America a long line of heroes, known and unknown. You, this year's graduates, have a glorious tradition to carry on, which I admire profoundly. Not because it is a tradition, but because it is glorious. Since I came from a country guilty of the worst tyranny on earth, I am particularly able to appreciate the meaning, the greatness, and the supreme value of that which you are defending. So, in my own name, and in the name of many people who think as I do, I want to say, to all the men of West Point, past, present, and future, thank you.
And that was the first chapter of Ayn Rand's book called Philosophy, Who Needs It? Back in a minute. Thank you. Well, Stuart Varney's becoming one of my favorite shows.
Griff Jenkins. Point well taken. Thanks very much, Griff. The White House is defending its decision to send those active duty troops to the border. Watch this.
If the border is secure, as the administration has said, then why would we need to send 1,500 active duty U.S. troops down there?
Because we need more work. More work needs to be done, Peter. We put forth a comprehensive immigration legislation, and Congress, Republicans in Congress refused to act. And so the president has used the tools that he has in front of him to prepare ahead of Title 42 lifting.
Okay.
So, again, this was, he didn't ask the smart question, the tough question. He asked an easy question that's easily deflected. Well, if the border is secure, why are we sending 1,500 troops down there? That's easily deflected. The question he should have asked is, what does President Biden promise? What does this administration promise the American people that these 1,500 troops are going to do in terms of cutting off illegal immigration? Ask any kind of a promise question. Or another even better one that's probably stronger is this a confession on the part of the White House that their promise to keep Americans safe has failed or has gone unfulfilled? Either way. Okay, so there's no promise questions, so it's very easy to deflect. There's no way this is going to stick to the administration unless you use the word promise. You've got to get the American people to know and understand that whether or not the politicians want to be slick about this and promise overtly that they go ahead and they make promises by simply assuming office, by taking the oath. When you take the oath, you promise to do certain things inherently. It's part of the job. It's not like, well, I didn't promise to represent you. I'm a representative in Congress, but I didn't promise to represent you. Well, yes, you did. You ran as a representative. You took the oath of office, and inherent in that oath is your duty to represent your constituents. Okay, so the same thing with the president. The federal government is in charge of the border. It is the President of the United States that's in charge of the federal government. Therefore, he has made an implicit promise to secure the border. So that would be an excellent question for me. Is this an admission on the part of the administration that that the border is not secure, that they have failed in their promise to secure the border? And again, keep bringing up the word promise again and again and again. Hammer these people with it so they get the message. They need to make promises. We're not going to let them off the hook, and they're going to be held accountable. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, a little bit more Stuart Varney.
Try this for a headline. This prairie chicken is Biden's latest weapon in his war on fossil fuels. Chris Kobach is the Attorney General of the state of Kansas, and that's what he wrote.
So anyways, what this is about is, again, that in order to, because the EPA, this is all about the EPA and about the environment and whatnot, and using this prairie chicken, listing it as threatened so that anybody that wants to drill for oil is going to have to ask permission of the federal government. And of course, during the Biden administration, that permission will not be forthcoming. So, but all of this came from where? Where did all of this crap come from? It didn't happen overnight. The EPA wasn't invented overnight. It was invented, I think, created by that major butthole, President Richard Nixon. But anyways, it started with the idea that all property is owned in common. It started with, it's not even an idea, it's a fallacy. What the left did is they said, oh, but look, if you pollute the air, you're not just polluting your air, you're polluting everyone's air. And if you do something to the soil, you're hurting everybody. And if you pollute the water, you hurt everybody, not just yourself. You're not just polluting your property. So therefore, we should look at property or think of property as being owned in common. No, it's a fallacy. The fact of the matter is, whether or not it runs downstream or if I am polluting the air and it goes somewhere else is not an issue for the federal government. It's not an issue for state governments. It's not an issue for any government. It is an issue, a tort issue. It would be malfeasance of some sort with, again, the civil system. So, in other words, I pollute the air, and that is going to most directly affect my neighbors. If my neighbors are not able to have what they call peaceable enjoyment of their property, then they can make a claim against me. They come to me, first of all, and say, please knock it off. If I refuse to knock it off, then they may take some other steps. They may try to do things to, change the wind direction, whatever. But ultimately, they sue. That's what the government's for them to come to court and say, Ron is polluting my property, whether I do it by in the air, in the water, or on the land. It is about individual to individual. Okay, so property is not owned in common, period. And the consequences are not shared in common. So what the air, there's a fallacy that the air I breathe here in California is the same air that's being breathed in China. No, it isn't. Absolutely not. It's completely false. It sounds good. It's a fallacy. It sounds good, but when you think about it, you realize it's false. And that's what at the root of this situation. We've got to if we're going to have rules and laws, then they have to be rules and laws that acknowledge private property. And without that, then we're not going to get anywhere. We're going to continue to have the federal government abusing its so-called authority. And actually, this is another example of the federal government acting as if it has rights. It has the right to monitor or regulate the numbers of lesser prairie chickens in Kansas, for instance. So, and the government has no rights, and property is not owned in common. Back in a minute. That's the thank you. That's the other thing I find very incredible. That's probably the best word to use about talk show hosts, whether they're on radio or television. But Stuart Varney was the one that really kind of brought that home for me, because he's another one of these people that's always talking about how the world's going to hell and the country's going to hell, and we're going to have a revolution, we're going to have a civil war, blah 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 blah, and then he smirks his way through the rest of the broadcast. He has this little smirky smile, and he laughs and jokes with people and slaps them on the back and makes little inside jokes with them. And the same thing with the rest of the Republican talk show hosts. They do the same thing. Sean Hannity will get on with, and say, well, it's terrible, horrible, and awful, and we're going to have a revolution and a civil war any day now. Or he'll even say we're in a clandestine civil war. I don't even know what the hell that's supposed to be. And then turn around and yuck it up with all of his, all the people in the studio, with his producer, what's-her-face, and or with his guests. So why should I take him seriously? If the world is really on the brink of disaster, his voice and his attitude should match the content. The attitude should match the content. If he's just bluffing about civil war and all that and whatnot, and he just wants to yuck it up all day, then drop all the Civil War talk and start talking about rainbows and unicorns and puppy dogs and things of that nature, or just make jokes for your entire broadcast. Either way. But the idea is that your facial expressions, in the case with Stuart Varney, or your voice inflection when it comes to people like Sean Hannity, has to match the content. Otherwise, I'm just not going to take you seriously. And then Sean Hannity will say, I don't understand why nobody's motivated. Duh. Figure it out. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, the rape of the mind.
The apostatic crime in totalitaria. Totalitaria makes the thinking man a criminal. For in our mythical country, the citizen can be punished as much for wrong thinking as for wrongdoing. Because the watchful eyes of the secret police are everywhere, the critic of the regime is driven to conspiratorial methods if he wants to have even a safe conversation with those he wants to trust. What we used to call the Nazi gesture was a careful looking around before starting to talk to a friend. The criminal in totalitaria can be an accidental scapegoat used for release of official hostility, and there is often need for a scapegoat. From one day to the next, a citizen can become a hero or a villain, depending on strategic party needs. Nearly all of the mature ideals of mankind are crimes in totalitaria. Freedom and independence, compromise, and objectivity, all of these are treasonable. In totalitaria, there is a new crime, the apostatic crime, which may be described as the obstinate refusal to admit imputed guilt. On the other hand, the hero in totalitaria is the converted sinner, the breast-beating, recanting traitor, the self-denouncing criminal, the informer, and the stool pigeon. The ordinary, law-abiding citizen of totalitaria, far from being a hero, is potentially guilty of hundreds of crimes. He's a criminal if he's stubborn in defense of his own point of view. He is a criminal if he refuses to become confused. He is a criminal if he does not loudly and vigorously participate in all official acts. Reserve, silence, and ideological withdrawal are treasonable. He's a criminal if he doesn't look happy, for then he is guilty of what the Nazis called physiognomic insubordination. He can be a criminal by association or disassociation, by scapegoatism or by projection, by intention or by anticipation. He's a criminal if he refuses to become an informer. He can be tried and found guilty by every conceivable ism, cosmopolitanism, provincialism, deviationism, mechanism, imperialism, nationalism, pacifism, objectivism, subjectivism, chauvinism, equalitarianism, practicalism, idealism. He is guilty every time he is something. The only safe conduct pass for the citizen of totalitaria lies in the complete abdication of his mental integrity.
And that was the apostatic crime in totalitaria from The Rape of the Mind. Back in a minute. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States today, bidding adios to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. So I'm reminding you that the left has no authority, no power, and they can't win.